Good morning, everyone. I'm Lillian Zia. I'm a product manager in the Android for Work team. I am joined by my colleague, Xiaowen Zhen, who is the Android Platform Security Product Manager. We're both delighted that you can join us today to hear about the new capabilities and features we have added in our latest Android release, a tasty dessert called Nougat, which is expected to be released in a few weeks. Mobility has tremendously changed our lives, and one of the most exciting aspects of mobility is their potential to change the way we do business. And we in Android are constantly thinking of new ways that we can bring new such transformation and innovation to work by building capabilities that enhance efficiency, delight users, and always put the security at the heart of every workplace activity. We, of course, understand that security is a big area of interest to all, from small, medium businesses to large enterprises. And so my colleague, Xiaowen, will start us off this morning by walking you through the latest features that the security team has built in Android 7.0. I will then walk you through the Android for Work specific features in Android Nougat. And then hopefully we should have some time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. With that, I will turn it over to Xiaowen to start us off.
Hey everyone. Thanks Lillian for the intro. My name is Xiaowen and I'm the PM for Android Platform Security. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity to introduce to you the latest security features coming with Android 7.0 Nougat. Before we dive into the details, let's review the Android platform security architecture at a high level. Android is designed to keep you and your data safe, whether your data is at rest, in use, or in transit. We do this using a multi-layered defense in depth security architecture. At the lowest level of the stack, the hardware provides the basic primitives to run Android. It is built with a root of trust to run only a properly signed operating system. In addition to running Android, the hardware also provides facilities to run a trusted computing environment, an ARM that's called TrustZone. TrustZone is an isolated, secure environment to run some security-critical functions, such as password verification, fingerprint matching, and key management. Built on top of this foundation, the kernel and system processes form the core part of the operating system and provide basic services to apps. At the very top, we have one or more users running on the system, with apps belonging to each of them. Android provides a sandbox for every app, such that it can only access data from other apps and system services that has been explicitly granted access to. These isolation guarantees also work to protect application data from unauthorized access by other apps. To help ensure the security of the system at runtime, Google also provides a set of services to complement what's provided by the platform. For example, Verify Apps periodically checks your system for harmful apps and warns you when one is found. With Android 7.0 Nougat, we've strengthened security across the board, most notably in 4 important areas. First, with Direct Boot, we've significantly enhanced the user experience of securely booting up. Along with that, we've also improved the plumbing under the hood, with some enhancements to data encryption. Second, we've hardened the platform in quite a few places, including some significant changes to the media stack. Third, app developers will find it easier to write safer apps with Android 7.0 Nougat, and we've also tightened the APIs a bit to make it harder for malicious apps to exploit. And last but not least, with seamless updates, It's now easier than ever to update to the latest version with the latest security patches applied. Now, diving into each of these areas in a bit more detail. We'll start with direct boot and encryption. Previously in Marshmallow, if your device was encrypted, then by default, you'd have to enter in your PIN pattern password during the boot process to decrypt your storage area and finish boot. Although this was very secure, it made the boot process much more complicated than necessary. If you reboot your phone and then put it back into your pocket, you'd have to remember to take it out again and enter in your PIN before anyone can call you. With Android and Nougat, we've changed the underlying encryption scheme to streamline the boot process so that your phone is immediately functional upon reboot, without your having to enter in your lock screen credential first. We call this feature Direct Boot. Under the hood, this improved user experience is enabled by file-based encryption. With this new encryption scheme, the system storage area, as well as each user profile storage area, are all encrypted separately, whereas previously with full disk encryption, all data was encrypted as a single unit. So your lock screen credential was required immediately at boot to decrypt it to finish boot. Now with profile-based encryption, the system can reboot normally into a functional state using just device keys. Apps that need to be functional immediately upon reboot, like the phone app and your alarm clock, can opt in to being able to run in a limited state after reboot, so people can call you and your alarm clock can wake you up. Once you've entered in your lock screen credential for the first time, then these apps can get access to your user data to provide full functionality. Security-wise, file-based encryption better isolates and protects individual users and profiles on a device by encrypting your data storage at a finer granularity. Each profile has a disk encryption key that is entangled with its lock screen credential, so that data can only be decrypted by that user. Encryption support is also getting stronger across the entire Android ecosystem. Previously with Marshmallow, all capable devices were required to support encryption, and many devices like Nexus 5X and 6P use hardware-backed keys so that your data is encrypted and can only be decrypted using unique keys that are stored in trusted hardware, such as in the ARM trusted execution environment. Now with 7.0 Nougat, all new Android devices must have hardware support for key storage, as well as enforce brute force protection for verifying your lock screen credential before those keys can be used. This way, all of your data can be decrypted only on your device and only by you. In addition to improving encryption, the second area where we made a lot of improvements was in the media stack and an overall platform hardening. Many of you in the audience probably recall the stage fright incident from last year. A number of integer overflow vulnerabilities were found in the media stack that could be exploited to gain remote code execution and privilege escalation. Luckily, due to several mitigations that were already in place, such as ASLR, the stage fright bugs were actually not easily exploitable. Nexus and several OEMs also put in a monthly security patch process to fix the vulnerabilities as soon as they were reported. With Nougat, we've added in multiple levels of defense, using both mitigation and containment techniques to safeguard the media stack against further attacks. First, by incorporating integer overflow sanitization, we prevent an entire class of bugs from being exploited, which comprise the majority of reported lib stage fright vulnerabilities. As soon as an integer overflow is detected, we shut down the process so that the attack doesn't have a chance to continue. Second, we've modularized the media stack to put different components into individual sandboxes and tighten the privileges of each sandbox to have the minimum privileges required to perform its job. As a case in point, the code responsible for parsing file formats in media codecs, which is where most lib stage fright bugs occurred, has been moved into unprivileged sandboxes with little or no permissions, while components that require sensitive permissions have been moved into separate sandboxes that only grant access to the specific resources the component needs. With this modularization effort, compromising a parser grants the attacker access to significantly fewer permissions and significantly reduced exposed kernel attack surface. In addition to hardening the media server, we've added a large list of protections across the entire platform. And here are a few. First, as of 7.0 Nougat, the Android Compatibility Definition Document, the CDD, now requires verified boot to be strictly enforced for all new devices, such that compromised devices that do not pass signature checks will not boot, or will boot in a limited way by skipping all corrupt data. In order to prevent non-malicious data corruption from affecting users, we've also added support for forward error correction to make the entire operating system more resilient against data corruption. Next, we've continued tightening SE Linux rules and increased SecComp coverage to further lock down the application sandbox and reduce attack surface. Much of sysfs, debugfs, and many dangerous IOTL commands are now no longer accessible to malicious apps. Third, we've increased loader randomness to make code reuse attacks less reliable. Libraries are now loaded in a random order to make it harder to guess where they're loaded, and we've also increased the entropy used by ASLR. Fourth, we've continued to harden the kernel with additional memory protection features and reduced its exposed attack surface. Android's 3.18 and above common kernel now segments kernel memory into non-writable code sections and non-executable data sections. This significantly raises the bar for many classes of attacks involving memory corruption. Though it was done as part of our Nougat work, this kernel feature is actually available to all devices running that particular kernel version. In addition, the kernel's perf system is now no longer accessible by default. Many IOTL commands are now similarly inaccessible to apps. The removal of these entry points significantly reduced attack surface in commonly targeted areas. And last but not least, with Nougat, we've introduced a whole file signature scheme for APKs that significantly improves verification speed while strengthening integrity guarantees, so that you can be sure that the APK you're installing has not been tampered with. This also speeds up app installation, which is especially useful for Android Instant apps. In addition to platform hardening, Nougat is now safer and easier for developers to use, and harder for malware authors to abuse. For developers, one noteworthy change with API level 24 and above is that your application private directory is now set to Linux permission 700 instead of 755. This means that other actors running on the system can no longer list the files in your directory or access any unprotected files. Previously, applications could share files with other apps by just passing them the file path. Though it's easy and efficient, this sharing mechanism cannot scope access to just the target app. Moving forward, apps must share content using a content provider, such as a file provider. Second, for apps targeting API level 24 and above, your network traffic is now also more secure by default. Previously, apps trusted user-installed certificate authorities by default, as well as those installed through device admin APIs. This allows a sophisticated user or a malicious app to man-in-the-middle encrypted connections to examine and modify the data sent between an app and its backend server. Quite a few of the bigger app developers have already made changes in their code to not trust user-added certificate authorities, and we have now made that the default. At the same time, those apps that want to be able to trust user-added CAs can still easily opt in to do so. Enterprises that need to be able to monitor their device traffic can consider requiring apps with access to enterprise data to be subject to man-in-the-middle by user-added certificate authorities. In addition to changes to the policy around user-added CAs, the system CA store is now also more trustworthy across the ecosystem. Android only allows CAs that have been approved by the upstream Mozilla Foundation, and by the compatibility definition document, all Android Nougat devices must ship that same CA store without making any device-specific modifications. Finally, on the topic of network security, we've introduced a feature called Network Security Config, which allows developers to much more easily configure their network security policy through a declarative configuration file. This includes blocking clear text traffic, configuring the set of trusted CAs and certificates, and setting up a separate debug configuration. Android Nougat is safer for developers to use, and also provides additional defenses against malicious apps. Earlier, we already mentioned quite a few places where we've hardened the platform and tightened the application sandbox with tools like SE Linux. We've also continued to lock down developer APIs to prevent abuse. And here are a few areas that we locked down. First, to preserve device privacy, we further restricted and removed access to persistent device identifiers like MAC addresses. Second, overlays can now no longer be displayed on top of permission request dialogues. This prevents malicious apps from using clickjacking to gain permissions without user knowledge. Third, to ensure you can easily uninstall third-party apps. Those apps with device admin permissions will no longer be notified of impending disable, and thus won't have the opportunity to try to block their uninstall. And fourth, malicious apps that acquire device admin permissions can no longer change your lock screen credential to lock you out of your device. These are just a few examples of what we've done in Nougat, and we will continue to lock down APIs to prevent abuse in O. The last area where we've made significant enhancements in Nougat is with system updates. We've completely overhauled the OTA update system to keep your device up to date with the latest system software much more easily. Like Chromebooks, new Android devices with updated firmware can now apply updates in the background while you continue to use your phone normally. These updates are applied to a different system partition, and when you reboot, it will seamlessly switch to that new partition running the new system software version. That new update system requires a whole new partition layout along with updated firmware, so will only be available with select new Nougat devices. Existing devices that updated Nougat have not been left in the lurch. The update experience has also been significantly simplified. We've made the install time for OTAs much faster, and the OTA size much smaller for security updates. The optimizing app step, which was one of the slowest parts of the update process, has been taken out due to optimizations in the new JIT compiler. So in conclusion, Android 7.0 Nougat brings major security improvements across all fronts, from enhancing encryption to media server and platform hardening, to helping developers more easily build safer apps, to making system updates much more seamless. To learn more, refer to the links on your screen. And now, back to Lillian to tell you more about the features in Android for Work.
Thanks, Shawan. Before we go more into details about the work features that we have added in Nougat, I want to just recap two of the main manageability modes that we support in Android for Work. The bring your own device, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, where employees bring their favorite Android device into the enterprise. The business is able to create a work profile, secure and separate the work data and work apps, and completely manage the work apps and work data in that work profile. Whilst the user, of course, can be assured that their personal data and personal apps are not accessible by their company. And in some cases, a company or a business may want to give their employees fully managed devices because they'd like to provide them most secure access to company resources. In that case, we call that mode, or we built a mode called Device Owner, where the company owns and manages the entire device and is full control of the enterprise, if you will. Additionally, Android for Work tries to address the diverse set of needs and manage fleets of devices that might be used for a single purpose. And we call this corporate-owned single use. For example, a kiosk. So devices that are typically deployed in a way where the device is locked to a single or a small number of applications. And with this, you are assured that the device can't be used for anything else other than the intended purpose, even if it's a kiosk that's basically in a public place. So for the history of the features that we've been adding in Android for Work, we introduced what I just talked about, the work profiles and the corporate label device owner mode back in Lollipop. We then enhanced the manageability capabilities and added the APIs for managing these corporate-owned single-use COSU devices in Marshmallow, as well as more polish for BYOD. And finally, Nougat, we wanted to basically address all the customer needs that we've had and strengthen security, improve the management capabilities, and also increase and enhance the control of employees. With that, we started, as my colleague just talked about security. Security is a critical aspect when it comes to using a mobile platform in the workplace. And so the Android security team, as you just heard, is raising the bar on Android security as you just heard on all the features that were added in Nougat. But within Android for Work specifically, we also introduced several features and policies and management APIs to better allow for manageability and control. Starting with always-on VPN. So data in transit, you just heard about the network security features, and additionally, we have introduced always-on VPN to protect the data in transit so that an enterprise can route all their data traffic from work apps through the VPN from boot to shutdown. And admins can set policies that basically ensure applications that are required to use a VPN service will fail to connect unless VPN is connected or the VPN connection is available. And for app developers that are developing VPN clients, they'll need to make sure that they handle these new entry points so that the device, so that on device boot, the system can start VPN service directly. Next, I want to go through some of the enhancements or features that we've introduced, specifically in the BYOD use case. Starting off with Work Challenge. We built this feature, which we call Work Challenge, effectively to allow you to have a separate passcode that protects the work apps and data on a BYOD device. This means that IT no longer needs to require complex lock screen passwords that get in the way. Instead, they can simply set passcode requirements that apply only to work apps. And this is, of course, available to profile owners because they can choose to set these password policies for the Work Challenge differently from policies for device passwords. And they can set these policies using the existing APIs that you have today in the Device Policy Manager, including set password quality or set password minimum length. They can still set the device lock screen policies using a new method that we've introduced, which is in Device Policy Manager, which we call Get Parent Profile Instance. So effectively, you have the flexibility to set restrictions and policies on either. Finally, we've also, as part of this feature, allow you to customize the credential screen that is shown for Work Challenge by using some new methods that we've introduced to customize both the organization color and the organization name. So the user is always aware that this is the Work Apps or Work Challenge screen. A new exciting feature that I'm sure a lot of employees will be happy to use is work mode. Of course, we all love our having both work and personal apps side by side, but a lot of people tell us that they just want to detach from work completely. imagine yourself Friday evening, you don't want to see those emails come in over the weekend. And that's where we added this feature called work mode that lets you control work apps from quick settings. Basically, you can shut them down just by tapping on the briefcase from quick settings. With that, basically, apps if you're in work mode, work apps will be running. But if you turn work mode off, then work apps won't run. They won't generate interruptions. They won't consume data. They won't impact your battery. Effectively, an off switch for work, which I'm using all the time. Work contacts, we've made improvements to accessing work contacts from your personal profile in previous releases, but in End specifically, we've made improvements so that work contacts are better integrated with the system dialer, messenger, and contact apps. You can now search across work and personal seamlessly. Also, if you get calls from your work colleagues that are not in your personal contacts, they're identified as work calls in the call log, so UX improvements. You can also do a remote directory lookup during the search if it's supported by that application. Also, the caller ID now supports remote directory lookup. So if you are a company of 10,000 employees, it's very unlikely that you'll have all these contacts stored locally, but you do get that call from a colleague. With that feature, now you can successfully look up that, it will successfully identify that contact detail. Of course, like with all the previous releases, access to contacts in work contacts from the personal profile are always controlled by policy that are set by the admin. So this capability is only allowed if the admin allows you to have those capabilities, such as searching contacts. Work dialer. So before Nougat, there was really no concept of a work dialer. Basically, all calls, whether they're personal or work, were always forwarded to the personal dialer, and you only had a single call log, which included all calls, whether they were personal or work. There was really no UX distinction, which call was personal, which call was work. And in Nougat, we are now introducing the capability for admins to be able to whitelist a dialer for work, which now can allow you to have a business phone account that you can use to make or receive work calls. And so all calls that are made with that work dialer will be inserted in a work call log. So now we have the concept of a separate call log for work calls. We look at this as laying the foundation to have the ability to have a second phone line for business. There are, of course, ways where VoIP applications, voice over IP applications, can implement Connection Service API, which is an API that was first introduced in Marshmallow, that will allow the ability to add that connection or phone account into that dialer. And there will be more documentation on this and references when the release is available. Location off switch. Of course, with BYOD, we take users' privacy very seriously. And in Nougat, we introduced the location for work app settings so that users can choose to deny or allow location updates or the last location queries for apps running in the work profile. And now, to recap some of the features that are new for corporate-owned devices. First is the QR code provisioning. With NFC bump, which has been available since Lollipop, has been the provisioning method that sets up and configures the device owner mode. But we know that some devices don't support NFC, which is why we are introducing QR code provisioning as an easy way to provision if you have a distributed fleet of devices which don't support NFC. The QR code provisioning method basically allows users, it's as easy as scanning a QR code from the setup wizard, which contains the payload of the key value pairs with the information that will be required to provision a device. with two exciting new features if you're managing a corporate-owned device. So device owners now are able to identify suspicious activity by remotely tracking device activity, including, for example, app launches, ADB activity, and screen unlocks. This is a feature we call process logging, and process logging feature doesn't require user consent. There is another feature we added for device owners, which is to remotely trigger and retrieve a bug report that will have the device state dump file. This allows forensic investigation. For example, if you have a known incident or a compromised device, you can trigger this remote bug report that will dump the device state. But due to the detailed nature of this bug report, we'll have lots of information that we do require user consent before the admin can retrieve that remote bug report. Finally, the section is about all the policies and controls that are, some of the policies or controls, I should say. We added a lot more features that we have time for to discuss here today. Specifically, we improved the transparency in the system UI, so you can always know that your device is affected by an IT policy. As you can see from the screenshot, the policies, especially that affect the user experience or restrict user settings, are fully disclosed to the user, and both the profile owners and device owners can attribute that policy to their company IT department. And they can do that because, in addition to the fact that we tell the user that this is not allowed because your organization has disabled this capability, we also allow the admins the ability to set help support messages. And there are two methods, the set short support message and long support message, that basically allows the admins a way to configure, for example, an email address or a phone hotline to call support, or a different message that is meaningful to that company or organization. Suspend apps lets device owners and profile owners to temporarily suspend access to packages. When they do that, they can call a method called set packages suspended to suspend a specific package. While that package is suspended, that package can't start activities. All notifications are suppressed. It will be hidden from the overview screen and won't be able to show toasts or dialogues and so on. Can't play audio or vibrate. This could be important if, for example, there is a policy where users can't use, for example, an application at a specific time. For compliance reasons, or the user is out of compliance and they can suspend their access to specific apps until they go back in compliance. And of course, this will require launchers to support a distinctive UI to these suspended apps. For example, show the app icon, as you can see in the screen, in gray color. And there is a mechanism for launchers to find out if a specific package is suspended or not. And finally, before I end the presentation, just as you saw in the security section, lots of great resources to go back to and refer to and get more information. I also put, I want to emphasize or bring to your attention, there are lots of resources for Android for Work, but one of the most important ones I feel is the test DPC. Because if you want to evaluate the full range of capabilities for device management, I do encourage you to download our developer-focused application, or EMM developer-focused application, Test DPC. It's available both in Google Play, also on GitHub in both source and binary. It functions as a profile owner or device owner with local controls, so you can configure policies, restrictions, from the app without needing a server, an enterprise server, to set them. But the great thing about Test DPC, it has lots of examples, not just of using the Device Policy Manager APIs, whether you're a profile owner or device owner, but we've also added examples to show you how to check to use the API to check if the device has the latest security patches that my colleague just talked about, the updates, and also about using safety net test APIs and so on. So I would highly encourage you to use TestDBC as a good resource for sample usage and things you should consider supporting. And we also recently published a mobility best practice advisory, which is a first in a series of best practices that we share recommendations for deploying Android for Work. So I highly encourage you to follow that link as well, and there will be additional advisories also published. With that, I think that brings us to the end of the presentation portion. We did receive a few questions that we wanted to maybe go over. We didn't, so I'll just recap the question and maybe and then try to attempt to answer. So one of the first questions was, can Google Work be widely used as a main solution for daily working communication, and what are the advantages? So I think this question is about Google for Work. And if so, then Google Apps obviously includes tools like Gmail or Drive or Calendar, Hangouts, etc., which are products that help teams collaborate. They're designed for collaboration, and so I believe if it's a Google for Work specific question, it's probably best if we're able to connect you, whoever asked that question, we can connect you to our Google Apps rep. So if you could reach out at the end, either via email, and we can connect you to a Google's app rep, because it feels like this is a Google Apps or Google for Work question. From the perspective of the Android for Work team, we obviously enable or build capabilities to use for work use cases in Android and the Android platform, a lot of what I just went through. Of course, we support applications in the work profile or in device owner mode for communications, for secure communication. And the second question we got is, we have an explicit proxy environment in our network. Some Google apps don't seem to respect the explicit proxy configuration, and they try to resolve DNS names without connecting to our explicit proxy. So, and there is a lot more in that question, actually. Basically, apps are failing to work as they should with a proxy setting. So I think this is definitely, I'd like to say this is definitely a common question or issue that has been raised by a number of customers. And so I'm well aware of this. I will have to say that there are, on Chrome, so Chrome browser on Android, there is a mechanism for setting a proxy server. So there is a policy that's available already to set proxy server. So definitely Chrome does support setting a proxy. Also, the Device Policy Manager API in device owner mode does have an API that's called Set Recommended Global Proxy that can be used to set a network-independent global HTTP proxy. Of course, as the name implies, it's recommended because it's possible that some apps may ignore it. So this is certainly something that we'll be looking at enhancing or providing a proper solution in a future release. We do definitely want to provide a mechanism for a device owner or profile owner to set a proxy configuration, whether it's path file or manual configuration, etc. So look forward to more details in the future, but it's something that we're going to be looking at for a future enhancement. Another final question is, how does Android N support working with the old Microsoft estate? So I'm not too sure what the old Microsoft estate means, but I'm going to take a guess. Of course, some of you might have heard, we recently announced support for Android for Work accounts, which are a new identity system that will be offered to our customers alongside the current Google domain options, whether it's managed Google domains or Google Apps for Work domains. And with this project, we basically removed the need for some of the more complex aspects of the Android for Work deployment for customers that don't use Google Apps. So effectively, customers that are traditionally use Microsoft Exchange, Active Directory, and so on, will be able to easily deploy Android for Work with this new identity solution. System. Also, I'm sure many of you know that Office is available on Android. It's managed by Intune. So I think I hope that answers the question. If someone feels their question wasn't adequately replied to, please do email us so we can better answer, if assuming that I understood the question. I think those were the only questions that we had. I believe that brings us to the end of the presentation or the session for today. It was really our pleasure to be able to talk to you about these great features that we have made available to you. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.